People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality. And so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. That's what it's all finally about, and that's what these clues help us to find within ourselves. The mind has to do with meaning. In here, what's the meaning of a flower? That Zen story of the sermon of the Buddha when his whole company was gathered and he simply lifted a flower. And there was only one man, Kashyapa, who gave him a sign with his eye that he understood what was said. What's the meaning of the universe? What's the meaning of a flea? It's just there, that's it. And your own meaning is that you're there. Now we are so engaged in doing things to achieve purposes of outer value that we forget that the inner value, the rapture that is associated with being alive is what it's all about.
A couple weeks ago, we had a message on death and the afterlife. And afterwards, someone came up to me and said, well, we've talked about death, so now can we talk about the meaning of life? And so, yeah, I know, I had that same reaction. And today, I'm here to tell you that we are going to talk about it, but you know, it's such high-level content that I think it's going to be reserved for our Ardea Plus subscribers, which I am offering today as a bundle with ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. So you get your favorite sports, favorite shows, and the meaning of life. So there you go. But if we want to talk about the meaning of life, I think there are two ways for us to approach that question. One, there is the meaning of capital L life. Why are we here? Why do we exist? But then there is also the question of what is the meaning of your life? What is the meaning of my life? And that search, I believe, is ancient. It's something we share with every human who has ever lived. And I think it's presented itself often in the form of a question. Maybe it's a question that you have asked. A question like, is there more? There must be more than what I'm currently experiencing. Is there more than just getting the most secure job? Is there more than just trying to live out the rest of my days with the least amount of resistance? Which I find so interesting because the stories that we are drawn to are the stories with the most adventure, the stories with the most challenge. So in our lives, we try to avoid opposition, avoid struggle, and yet we recognize that the best stories actually require opposition. I mean, imagine Romeo and Juliet if they go to their respective families and the families are like, yeah, you can get married. We don't have any problem with those people, you know. That wouldn't be much of an interesting story. I guess they would have survived, but, you know, that's another thing. Or Cinderella. You know, imagine Cinderella goes to the ball, and before she dances with the prince, she says, here's my address and here's my name. So in case there's any confusion, here's how you find me. Again, there's no story there. And the same is true of our life. It's the challenges that actually brought the most growth. It was the most difficult moments that proved to be the most rewarding. Think about those moments in your life where you had a goal, where you had something you were trying to achieve, and if at that moment you could have just snapped your fingers and had it all right in front of you, you wouldn't have even had an appreciation for it. You wouldn't have developed the value for it, and you certainly would have grown into the person that you needed to be in order to get there. And so on some level, we recognize that we all must go on journeys. And using that word, I know for me, there's kind of like different tapes that play in my mind. These moments when our plans changed. Moments when surprises occurred. moments when we experience failures, and yet those failures actually taught us something profound and crucial we needed to move forward. The journey is not a straight line, and it's not always easy. On the journey, usually the bed isn't as comfortable, the toilet isn't as clean, but we know on a soul level that it's crucial to our development. And there's this interesting connection between that question of what is the meaning of life and the journeys that we are all invited onto. But I feel like, I know this has happened to me many times, I feel like we get that connection a little twisted. We often think, if I had a sense of meaning, if I could discern what my meaning of life is, then I'll go on a journey. Then I'll feel inspired. Then I'll feel like I have the resources or I have the motivation to go on a difficult journey. And yet I wonder what it would be like if we flipped it around, if we reversed it, if we recognized going on a journey is what will provide that sense of meaning. The author Donald Miller recently wrote a book called Hero on a Mission, and he really explores this idea. He says, meaning is not an idea to be agreed with. It is a feeling you get when you live as a hero on a mission, and it cannot be experienced without taking action and living into a story, your story. So jump in, and the meaning will follow. And when he's using the word hero here, he's not necessarily talking about a singular person that is going to save the world, not a superhero. No, it's more about the recognition that we are all heroes and heroines of our own journey. Have you ever had that question, that moment where you wondered, am I even the main character in my own life? Feeling like I don't feel like a hero. I don't feel like my life is a journey. And yet what Donald Miller is proposing and what people like Joseph Campbell have proposed is that it's not about becoming a hero. It's about recognizing that you already are the hero of your journey. And if you're not familiar with Joseph Campbell, we might think of him as the Michael Jordan of myth. He really popularized this idea called the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is also known as monomyth, or essentially just that singular myth, that singular arc, that singular pattern that permeates all story, film, television, movies, and our stories. And what he found about this pattern, this structure, was pretty surprising, I think, because it looks a little different than what we tend to think of when we think of story. So we think a story starts in one place and it ends somewhere different. But Joseph Campbell zoomed out and he recognized that story structure actually looks a lot more like a circle, in that we end where we began. Maybe not literally, but certainly symbolically. And what that structure specifically is, as Kathleen mentioned, is it's that of leaving, going on a journey, and returning. But you are different. You have now changed. So we leave home, we return home, and we return different. And home does not necessarily mean a literal place of home or a hometown. Home in this sense is really a metaphor for the familiar, the known. And in that sense, you don't need to physically leave your front door to go on your hero's journey. Though I certainly suggest it, please do. But really, it's about an internal journey, a universal pattern of leaving the familiar and returning to the familiar. And it's honestly something we do every day. Olivia and I like to plan date night, and I've found that there's all this excitement, when we're picking our favorite restaurant. In the morning, we kind of think, where are we going to go? And then in the afternoon, we're like getting really hungry, and we're like, it's going to be so good. And then when we get to the restaurant, we're like, I can't wait to order my favorite thing. And then about halfway through dinner, immediately a switch flips, and we're like, I'm so excited to go home and like sit on the couch. Like, we've been out enough. Like, this is anyone else? Like, you're like, let's go out, let's go home. if you don't relate, I made a graph just to really explain this. So on the left, we have the desire to be out, and on the bottom, we have the time of day. In the morning, the desire is there. In the afternoon, it really grows. And while we're out, it's the strongest. But about halfway through dinner, you'll see that there is a swift downturn, and then we want to be home. So the hero's journey is something we experience a little bit every day, but it's also something that is fundamental to the larger cycles we experience in our life. And it's not really about where we are leaving from or where we are going. Campbell says this: what each must seek in their life never was on land or sea. It is something out of their own unique potentiality for experience, something that has never been and never could have been experienced by anyone else. I grew up in Southern California, which I know is sort of, here in Arizona, there's a little bit of rivalry hate, so I don't know what people think of when I say that, but for a lot of people in different parts of the country, Southern California is a place that people want to be, people want to end up. So it's ironic, or at least very interesting, growing up in a place like that. And I realized that despite, the pull that many people feel towards Southern California, I realized that if I was going to go on my journey, if Jake was going to go on Jake's journey, he would have to leave that same place that many people are trying to go to. And I realized it's not about the where, it's about honoring that journey within. Because change truly exists within. Yet often in our lives, we measure change externally. We just wish that the world would change, that others would change, and our lives would be so much easier. Or we measure our own change externally. We look at the achievements we've experienced. We look at the ways that other people see us. And yet, it's internal change that actually changes everything. It's when you change internally that the world will change around you. Because once your perception changes, everything else does. Have you ever experienced that in your own life? Those moments where maybe it was a relationship and there was some difficulty and you were hoping for some change. And yet it was that moment when you realized that you cannot change another person, you can only change yourself. It was in that moment that you actually made them feel, maybe for the first time, accepted as they were. And then that acceptance freed them up and motivated them to experience the necessary change. Or maybe it was your career and you're thinking, why aren't things happening for me? Why aren't things moving along? And yet when you started looking inside and you stopped looking externally, that was when changes started to happen. Last week I was in Seattle, and it was a nice trip because it was the first time I'd been back, and it's a place that I moved from and lived for 6 years. And something really interesting happened for me in that I was revisiting some of my favorite places, and in these places, particularly some nature walks, I realized and remembered that these were the very places where a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, I had been dreaming of the work and the community that I get to be a part of right now. I was dreaming of Aldea, and I didn't even know Aldea existed. And so how unique and how even full circle it was to come back and re-experience those same places from a changed perspective. And we like that phrase, right? Come full circle. Things are now full circle. But what is the full circle? I think Campbell had a pretty interesting idea about the full circle. See, he saw that as we move along the circle, we move from the known into the unknown and then back to the known. Dorothy starts her journey in Kansas, and then right around here, she is no longer in Kansas. And she ends up back in Kansas, but she is different. The hobbits, they start in the Shire. They go on an incredible and difficult journey, and they end up back in the Shire, but they are forever changed. What were those moments in your stories where you crossed that threshold between the known into the unknown? And why do we have to go into the unknown? Why is it so important that we go there? It's where we encounter ourselves in ways that we never could When surrounded by safety, when surrounded by comfort, when surrounded by the familiar, we have to go into the unknown to experience ourselves in new ways. Many of us have taken trips. It's summertime. And I think this is a huge part of why we go on trips. Yes, we leave home. Yes, we see and do some amazing things. But really, there's an internal change that's happening the whole time. And so when we come back, yeah, you might have some pictures and videos on your phone. You might have some souvenirs you brought, but it's really not just about that. It's about the fact that you are different because you left the familiar. And not only is leaving the known okay, it's necessary. There are gifts and a richness to life that we will only find in the unknown. I think about this room and so many of the wonderful conversations that I've been privileged to have, and I've recognized that for so many of us, we've all been on some kind of journey of leaving the known, maybe specifically when it comes to religion and spirituality. We are a people who have maybe left certain organizations, structures, a feeling of tribe. And maybe in that first leaving, you might have wondered, am I okay? Is this even okay? Because everything my tribe told me for so long was that leaving is wrong, that you must keep the faith. Is it okay to be leaving? And yet, for most, if not all of us, what we've experienced is that there is a richness to life that we have found, not in spite of the fact that we left, but because we left. I know for me, I grew up in a form of Christianity that really just told me, yeah, don't leave, keep the faith, hold on, stay strong. And ultimately, I got to a point in my life where I did walk away from the structure of what I grew up with. But I realized that going from the known into the unknown, I was able to experience my own tradition in a way that I never would have had I not left the familiar. And in a way, I've returned back to the known in a symbolic sense in that, yeah, here I am in a form of ministry. I have the title pastor, and yet I feel so privileged that I was able to go into the unknown in order to bring back something with me. And I think about even the story of Jesus, even if we look at it just from the form of narrative, and we look at Jesus' story, and this idea that Jesus was a being who left divinity, goes on a journey, comes into the world, dies, returns to divinity, and yet is forever changed by what has been experienced in his life. In fact, so much that it's said that Jesus chose to bear the scars of his death, that the scars were of value to him. And not only that, the scars are of value to others, that Jesus lived a life of self-sacrifice, that his journey was not just about him, but it was about others. See, when we go into the unknown, there we face darkness. There we face trials. Maybe we face what feels like the whole world turning on us. And yet it is in the unknown that we are also given a gift. And in many stories, that gift is something literal. It's King Arthur pulling the sword from the stone. It's an elixir. Some have called it the pearl of great price. And yet, for us, that gift is often symbolic. It's something we experience about ourselves that was only possible because we went into the darkness. And that gift, that value, that quality, that part of your character that you received is not just a gift for you, it's a gift for all. Because somewhere along the way, your journey transcended just you. You were on your journey, and yet along the way, it became about a family that you were building or a cause that you became a part of. So those moments in your life when you were called to leave, when you were called to abandon the comfort and safety of the known, you actually did that for the benefit of everybody. Often at the end of our time here, we'll gather in groups, and we'll share our stories with each other. And I've found that the wisdom that you so freely share with one another is all wisdom that came at a price. It came from you participating in this ancient cycle of moving from the known into the unknown, bringing those gifts back into the known to be shared in community. There's a great book, if the topic of this series interests you, there's a great book that I'd recommend called The Alchemist from the author Paolo Coelho. And there's a line from that book that I love, and it says, "Whoever you are or whatever it is that you do, when you really want something, it's because that desire originated in the soul of the universe. It's your mission on earth." What if honoring your own personal journey, your own personal version of leaving the known, returning to the known, forever changed, and bearing gifts? What if that's actually your contribution to humanity? Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. It's theologian Howard Thurman. Now, chances are when you look at this structure, you might not see something that you did just one time in your life. You might see something that you did repeatedly, that you, over many years, went from the known to the unknown to the known. You went on your hero's journey again and again and again. Because as long as we draw breath, we are participating in a process of continually coming alive, of continually coming into being. And I'll end with this. This is from author Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She says, "The most beautiful people I've known are those who have known trials, have known struggles, have known loss, and have found their way out of the depths." See, when I look around at this room, I see some of the most beautiful people I have ever known, because you are people who have left the known. You are people who have braved your hero's journey, and you have returned with gifts that you are eagerly willing to share with those in this community. So Aldea, I just want to encourage you and say this. When you are faced with challenge, when you are faced with unknown, when you are faced with a pull to leave the known and you don't know where it's coming from, don't run. You don't need to be afraid, because this is you on your hero's journey, and you are anything but alone.